Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Donohoe. Join us for our new podcast series, FXomics. We'll be exploring the new technologies of integrative medicine, including genomics, metabolomics, the microbiome, and many more fields that are transforming healthcare. We're focusing on how they apply to practitioners and how we can incorporate them into our patient care. We aim to make these exciting and sometimes challenging fields relevant to you and your practice. Search for FXomics on your favourite podcast platform, and we look forward to your company.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Joining us on the line today from Western Australia is Dr. Adrian Lopresti, who's a clinical psychologist in private practice and senior researcher at Murdoch University, Western Australia. He's over 20 years of clinical experience working with children and adults suffering from a range of mental health conditions. Dr. Lopresti has experience in a range of psychological therapies and has received extensive training in nutritional and lifestyle treatments for mental health disorders. He regularly publishes in peer-reviewed and high-impact journals on the effects of diet, nutraceuticals, sleep and exercise for the treatment and prevention of depression, anxiety, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that's ADHD, and bipolar disorder. He's completed several clinical trials investigating the effects of curcumin, saffron and ashwagandha for the treatment of anxiety and depression in children and adults, and indeed has recently published, this year, 2018, a paper using saffron. Dr. Lopresti is also the founder of Personalised Integrative Therapy and regularly conducts workshops both nationally and internationally. Now, when we last had Adrian on FX Medicine, we spoke about his integrative approach to mental health. Today, we're going deeper into teenage depression and mood disorders. I guess this is the question, have you got 5 hours? It's a massive topic, Adrian, so welcome back to FX Medicine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
Now, as I said, this is a huge issue. We're seeing more and more of it in our community. Indeed, more and more resources are being thrown at it because it's such a huge issue. How big or how common is this issue, especially in youth?
Yeah, it's actually quite a big problem. It's estimated that about 10 to 20% of children and adolescents experience a mental health disorder during their youth, which is probably even an underestimate. But and it's particularly concerning because if you suffer from anxiety or depression as a youth, you're at greater risk of also then suffering from similar disorders as an adult too, and obviously the longer that you suffer from the condition, the harder it is to treat.
We're seeing huge issues with self-esteem, bullying, social media, peer group issues, all of this sort of issues regarding or having an effect on our affect. How important is this in the profiling, is that the right word, the diagnosis, in assessment of teenagers?
Yeah, I mean, early interventions are key. So if we can identify youth at risk, and obviously the earlier we identify it, then the greater we have of either preventing it progressing into a full-blown disorder, and the greater likelihood we have of having a successful treatment outcome. So it's really important for us to be able to identify some of the risk factors associated with mental health problems in youth, and then treat accordingly.
And of course, we as adults rattle off these things about assessment, and then you have a teenager sitting in front of you that's looking rather closed and withdrawn and not really wanting your company. How do you get through to teenagers? How do you get them to open up?
Yeah. It is difficult for some teenagers. It can be quite difficult. For others, they're quite happy to come in and have a discussion. I mean, I think the issue with teenagers coming in for an assessment is that, unlike adults, where generally, I'll say as a general rule, they come in willingly and they're the ones that are making the appointment and so forth. With teenagers, it's not necessarily the case. They're brought in because of mum or dad's concerned about them, and they may not necessarily be a compliant recipient to treatment. So it's really important for us to develop rapport with them, and it may just take some time. Firstly, just to just get to know them first before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of what's going on for them. So rapport is important for everybody, but I think it's particularly important with teenagers in particular.
Can I, out of interest, take a little step back here and sort of think about this from the parent's perspective? And the reason I ask this is it's not uncommon for parents, in their grief, to say, I never saw it coming, when they've got a teenage suicide. What sort of light bulbs need to go on? What warning lights need to go off, and why? What do we look for?
Yeah, it's something we do need to be aware of. I mean, although suicide is uncommon in teenagers, it's less than 1% of teenagers, the reality is, though, that it is a particularly high-risk time. It's actually the third leading cause of death of 15 to 24-year-olds. So it's something we do need to be very mindful of.
Yep.
And some of the warning signs include obviously talking about death, saying things like, be better off dead, even glorifying death. Talk around that would be certainly obviously an alarm bells. But the other hints would even be changes in behaviours, withdrawing from peers, spending more time on their own. There might be light bulb moments that you need to consider and think, what's going on for my child? So that social separation, if they were quite social before and now they're no longer doing that, that's one that I'd be quite concerned about. If they're engaging in kind of greater at-risk behaviours or riskier behaviours, that can be another sign. I mean, obviously they're giving away treasured possessions and they're writing songs or reading poetry or writing letters about death. They're always things that we need to be mindful of.
Well, no wonder it's so confusing. All of those things I was going, yep, I did that. Yep, I did that. Yep, I did that. Songs, yep. Yeah. So how do you pick? I mean, this must be so confusing for parents. Is there any way that a parent can direct their child and say, listen, I'm worried about you. I know that you're probably going to close down, but I'm worried about you for this reason. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Have you ever, taught parents, or is there any psychologist way of approaching this for the parents to say, you need to ask a direct question or you need to ask an indirect question? How's it supposed to be handled?
Well, it really varies. It varies depending upon the type of relationship the parent has with their child. So for some parents where the relationship is quite open and quite a positive relationship, then certainly directly asking is not going to be a problem. For others where that relationship isn't there, then it may be more difficult getting information. So that's where I would kind of look at, are there any other family members or any other friends that can talk to your youth? So I'll try to enlist the support of other significant others who may have a better relationship with their child, with the youth. So it is very individualised rather than a direct thing. But ultimately, if there's changes in behaviours, that there's behaviours that are just not characteristic for their youth, and also, are there particular alarm stresses going on? Has there been changes in relationships? Has there been a breakdown in friendships? Has there been a breakdown in a girlfriend-boyfriend relationship going on there? Has that changed? I mean, obviously there are risk factors. If there's parental divorce or separation going on, that increases the risk. So it needs to be kind of coincided with, are there any other stresses going on that might increase the risk of suicidal ideation? So
how do you get teenagers, once you've sat down with them for an hour or so and you've had a little bit of an introduction, how do you get them to comply to, stick to a revisitation, adhering to their, hopefully it's a mental health care plan? How do you get them to stick to that?
Well, I think it's really about having that conversation with them. I think one of the things that I do when I'm seeing teenagers is, obviously first just trying to develop some type of rapport with them, and then just talking a bit about their areas of, what things are they interested in, Are there particular areas that they want to change in their life? Are there particular areas that they're not quite happy with? And then from there, talk a bit about how their mood might be impacting on their school performance, for example. Performance is important. So just something to engage with. Is their socialisation, are friendships important to them, and what impact does their anxiety or low mood have on relationships? So I think it's even for some, I've got many who are very interested in sport and athletic performance, and so we might kind of use that as a direction for us to move towards. We're going, okay, you're interested in sport, you're interested in in your athletic ability, are your mood problems impacting on your ability to perform in that area?
Right.
So it's really just trying to see what they're interested in and then trying to engage them in that particular area.
And of course, the mental health care plan, I say mental health care, but it's mental health plan, correct? Is that the correct terminology? Which in Australia is given as a 6-visit thing, and then you can extend it. Is that right? Or a 5-visit thing?
Yeah, so it's 6 visits, and then you can have another 4 visits per calendar year.
So it can be extended next year. The wily practitioner, I guess, would start to use some at the end of one year and some at the beginning of another. But anyway, do you?
If it works out that way,
yeah, that's right. Unfortunately, we can't control our minds. But anyway, I don't know what that's like around the world. If our FX Medicine listeners would like to give us a bell on what's available for them in their country, in their situation, we'd love to hear about how healthcare plans vary around the world. What factors influence youth mood and behavioural problems? I've been through a couple with regards to social media, but what about hormones and things that we can't necessarily control?
Yeah, there's lots of changes going on for teenagers from a physiological point of view, and that certainly can contribute to mood problems. Changes in hormones, your testosterone levels, and in boys and so forth. So I'd say that hormones do certainly play a part in youth mood. The other thing too is also the environmental factors. Obviously, we've talked about kind of your bullying and your social pressures. There's also your academic stresses, things like that are going on. The other thing too is even you've got your what's going on in the home. What's the home environment like?
Yeah.
What's the parents' relationship like? So it may not necessarily have to do specifically with them, but it could be that their parents they're going into a home environment that's not very positive, and that obviously will affect their mood. And then you've got things like the desire for independence and negotiating that independence with parents and the conflict that often occurs around that. You've got for many teenagers your poor diet, your disrespect of sleep, I suppose that often occurs too, and then your technology and social media use. So all those different things can affect their mood, and ultimately it's about trying to identify what specific factors are influencing the person sitting in front of us, which could be very different to someone else coming in. So,
and do you find that teenagers are receptive or non-receptive to assessment tools, like, for instance, the HAM-A, the HAM-D, the DAS, rating scales that are freely available?
I don't use a lot of questionnaires with youth, to be honest. So, generally I'll use questionnaires if they're struggling verbalising and talking. So I might use that as a kind of a point, a discussion point. So, and I'm not so much interested in the final score. I'm interested in the questions, the answers that they give to a particular question. So if they say, and that might then be a discussion point. So let's say they say they're not, their sleep is poor. They give it a rating of 0, for example, indicating that it's poor. Then I might then use that to talk a bit about their sleep, what's going on with their sleep, and use that as kind of a point of discussion. So I'm more interested in the qualitative information that I get from the questionnaires rather than an ultimate score indicating whether it's high or low.
And we talk about anxiety, depression, but things like acting out, what about aggression?
A lot of teenagers will, and even children will display their sadness through aggression, and particularly boys. So it's very difficult to, a lot of the symptoms are not similar to adults. So I think if there's a lot of aggression, and that's not characteristic, if there's a lot of moodiness that's occurring, then that might be a warning sign of sadness and low mood going on.
Yep.
And that, again, then requires a bit more questioning and assessment around that.
And, indeed, there's been some nutrient implications with aggression, whether it be a deficiency or even an overload. Do you assess for these? Do you question, or do you look at maybe demographic factors? Like, for instance, I understand Perth is quite high in copper. And what was there? Was there another heavy metal that was implicated in aggression somewhere?
Yes, look, I mean, I don't necessarily do a lot of blood, or organise a lot of blood assessments for teens. I think it can certainly be useful to do, but if they're not even wanting to be there, it can be very difficult for them to then see me, and then I've got to refer them to go see a GP to go get a blood test done.
Gotcha.
So I might then just educate. So if I can then engage them, and they are interested in improving their mood, and they go, yeah, it is impacting on my life. It is impacting on a particular area of my life that I think is really important. Then we'll talk about what factors can affect mood, and I'll talk a lot about diet and nutrients, and provide some education around how that affects our mood. And then we might just talk a bit about, let's say, for example, zinc. We'll talk about some of the foods that are high in zinc, and what foods that they're consuming that may be high in zinc, or if they're not consuming that at all. And we'll kind of develop some goals around maybe just modifying that. But again, it needs to be realistic. I think that if we are recommending drastic changes in diet, there's probably 1% of, in my experience, 1 to 5% of youth are quite happy to look at dramatic changes in their diet, and the rest of the 95%, there's no way I can engage them with that. So we'll just look at modifying certain areas, trying to incorporate extra fruits and veggies, or they might set some goals for it to eat a particular food that's high in zinc every couple of days, and we'll work towards that. We might supplement. Generally, youth are pretty good at taking supplements, so that's often an easier way for them to take.
That's really strange. I would have thought they'd have a compliance issue with supplements. Not so, you reckon?
Well, look, it all depends. I think some teens can be very resistant to changing their diet, and so really then I'm looking at, well, where can we change? And although supplements are not ideal, and you want to try to derive a lot of the vitamins and minerals from at least the base from a good diet, some teens are just not willing to make those changes.
Yeah.
So it may be easier for them to take a zinc tablet or omega-3 fatty acids or things like that. And it just depends. Some teens are open to changing their diet, but I think there's more resistance for a lot of them.
Yeah. Research on nutraceuticals and herbs, nutrients for the treatment of youth mood and behavioural problems is increasing. You've indeed been involved for quite some time. And you've got a recently published study on saffron. Can you please take us through this? What was it useful for? What was your cohort? And what did the results tell you?
Yeah, I looked at the effects of saffron for anxiety and depressive symptoms in teenagers. I wrote a paper several years ago looking at just reviewing some of the nutrients for depression, in particular for youth. And I was quite alarmed, actually, at the lack of good quality research looking at nutrients with youth. And there wasn't a lot of good controlled studies. So that kind of then triggered me to really want to do more research looking at the effects of nutraceuticals in youth. And so I managed to get some funding to look at the effects of saffron. I used a patented saffron extract with youth. And it was an 8-week study where they took 14 milligrams of saffron twice a day for 8 weeks. So it's a double-blind placebo-controlled study. And the kids that I recruited were teenagers, not with diagnosed depression or anxiety. I wanted to look at kind of your moody youth, I suppose, ones who kind of were reporting anxiety or depressive symptoms, but not necessarily having a diagnosis. And what we found was that in terms of looking at the internalizing symptoms, so the anxiety and depressive symptoms collectively, there was about 35% reduction in symptoms over the 8-week period, compared to only about 17% in the placebo. So it's really quite positive that the results were statistically significant and probably clinically meaningful too. So just by taking saffron, we're looking at least a 20% improvement compared to a placebo in their mood, which is really positive.
Really positive. And what was the cohort size?
So it was we recruited 80, and I think about 65 or so finished the study.
Oh, it's decent. That's very decent, but particularly for teenagers. Like, that's really decent.
Yeah. What we also did, we got the teenagers to do some questionnaires over the 8 weeks, and then we also got parents to rate their youth too in terms of the mood. So we got the two perspectives, and what we found was that the effects were greater in the youth. So they reported generally better improvements compared to their parents. I'm not sure why that was the case. What seems to be the case is maybe the youth self-reports are more reliable measure of mood than the parents' reports of their youth. Does that make sense? And so, I don't know, we'll see. And I suppose the other thing too is that if a youth is suffering from anxiety and depression, it could also be that the parents have their own mental health issues too. So for them to be able to see some of the changes in the youth, it might be difficult.
Yeah, and maybe not cognizant of the actual issues presented with their offspring. Yeah. Wow. That's both enlightening and sad.
Yes.
At the same time. Exactly. I think it says something about the stresses in our whole society. And with regard to, I was going to ask you earlier, with regards to the mental health plans, when you've got, a 5, maybe an added on 6 maybe added on 4 visits, so a potential maximum of 10 in a year, what's the realistic time to see a real result? I mean, we're talking about things like self-perspective, self-esteem, self-awareness. What's the realistic time to expect a result in a teenager versus what's subsidised?
The research does show that most change occurs in the first few sessions. And that's the case with adults, and I don't expect it to be that much different with youth. So I kind of stopped complaining about the 10 sessions a long time ago. The reality is that's what I've got, and that's what I've got to work with. So there's no use complaining about it. So within that, I know I've got 10 sessions. Obviously, people can come in more, but now they're going to be totally out of pocket for my sessions when they come and see me. But if I know that I've got 10 sessions, I go, well, what can I do in those 10 sessions? And there's lots that I can do, but I don't have to do it myself.
Yeah.
So I know that social connections is really important for them. So what about if as part of my work, I try to connect them with a youth group? I try to do some work by developing, getting them engaged in some type of hobbies or interests or sporting activities. That's where the change is going to occur, not in my office. Yeah. So part of my work is also about trying to change their environment. I'm also teaching them if I think their sleep hygiene is poor. It doesn't take long. Within a week you can change some of your sleep hygiene. The key is the motivation to change. But if we know that if we can sleep an extra hour or 2 a night, the impact on our mood is huge. So 10 sessions is what I've got, and 10 sessions is what I work with. I might not be able to change deep core belief systems, but I don't have that 10 sessions to be able to do that. And then maybe we can do a piece of work now and a piece of work next year or the year after when they're ready. So
going back to that saffron study, forgive me,
yep.
I totally forgot to ask you before, how quickly did subjects respond to the intervention?
Yeah, we did every 2 weeks we got them to complete the questionnaires.
Yeah.
So everybody starts getting better in the first 2 weeks, whether you're on placebo or not on placebo or on saffron. So there's changes that are occurring within the first 2 weeks. And I think the changes within the first 2 weeks were statistically significant for both placebo and saffron.
Right.
So even if you put somebody on placebo, they'll feel better. As a general rule, they'll feel a little bit better after 2 weeks. Now, obviously, they continue to get better. And what it seemed to do is about 4 weeks, they'd almost reached their peak. And if they weren't better after 4 weeks, they probably weren't going to get any more better. That makes any sense grammatically. But so about 4 weeks, they hit their peak, and maybe they got a little bit better in the second 4 weeks. But the improvements occurred quite rapidly.
And can you just discuss a little bit about safety aspects of saffron, say with perhaps to long-term treatment for those people that might need it?
Well, with this study, saffron was very well tolerated. In actual fact, there was a tendency for less reported headaches in people on saffron compared to those on placebo. So very well tolerated. The issue with a lot of saffron studies is that the longer studies generally, there's one study done with Alzheimer's patients which went for a year, but that was the only one that's been done for a longer period. So the studies are generally about 8 weeks long and well tolerated. So safety, it's safe to have a longer period. We're not quite sure about. I suspect it would be very, very safe. But we just don't know. So, and the other thing that I don't know is, we've given a dose of 15 milligrams twice a day. I suppose what would be useful to do is if they weren't better after 4 weeks, if we had titrated it up, if we had increased the dose to 30 milligrams twice a day, could those non-responders start responding?
Now that's interesting.
And that's another study. We're always giving 15 milligrams twice a day for all the studies, but we don't know whether that's the optimal dose.
That's interesting. And I take your point, like we're dealing with saffron. And I think this is the thing where, I get, for the skeptics of natural medicine, I get that we'd love larger sample sizes. I get it. Yep, sure. We need more research. Give us some money. Give you some money.
Exactly.
Give Dr. Adrian Lopresti some money.
I'm happy to have it.
Yeah.
My bank account's ready.
But I think the thing that people should be cognizant of is, especially in sensitive or vulnerable populations, safety is a massive aspect to consider, particularly with psychoactive substances. So this is something that really should seriously be looked at. It really, really should.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think that for a lot of teenagers, or for youth and children, we're looking at, the research is on your psychological therapies or your pharmacological treatments, and the research isn't that good on the pharmacological treatment for depression and anxiety in youth.
Yeah, and particularly long term. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. So the next option is to look at some of your natural therapies for youth, and looking at things like saffron. And no, this is the first study ever being done on saffron for youth. And I'd say that'd be the case for a lot of natural therapies.
Yeah.
There's a little bit there with omega-3s for depression, but a lot of our common herbs and ashwagandha, for example, there's no research on in youth. Curcumin, there's no research in youth. St. John's wort, there was a couple of really poorly designed studies with youth. So even St. John's wort hasn't been investigated with youth. So it's just an area that's just not touched.
When you see other research and you look at it, with these negative effects, and so they go no effect, no effect, no effect, do you find that they're either ignorant or mischievous? Do you find that, how could you just give a herbal supplement without addressing your diet? You can't have a fast food diet with high trans fats, high sugar, high carb, along with a nutraceutical or a herbal intervention. Do you find that a lot of these studies are poorly done because they don't take heed of how important diet is?
You're right. It's crazy. The studies that I'm doing, we're looking at we're giving a saffron supplement, and they could be eating junk food all day, their sleep is poor, they're using drugs, and I'm giving them a saffron tablet. Let's be serious here. and I would do my clients a disservice if they come into my office and they describe suffering from depression or anxiety, and I go, here, take this tablet and go away.
Yeah.
We do, and unfortunately, that's the way studies are done. And then if you do include multiple treatments or multiple components in your study, it's criticised because they go, well, we don't know which one worked. It's like, well, who cares?
So the problem is the science. The problem is what we want as a control.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's really that integrative approach, which is I'm a huge advocate of, is looking at the multiple components and putting it all together, and small changes in several areas, each on their own may not be that powerful, but collectively extremely powerful. And that's where the research needs to be headed towards, incorporating an integrative approach. We don't care which bit of it worked or which was more powerful, or in the end, the whole program works collectively.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to conduct a study looking at that integrative approach, which is something I've developed as a program called Personalised Integrative Therapy, which incorporates all the different modalities or areas that can affect mood, and let's put it all together as a program and see if that is going to result in significant improvements compared to, say, cognitive behaviour therapy.
Well, I, for one, and I'm sure all of our listeners can't wait for the results of that to come out. Please give more money to the government.
Yeah.
Adrian, you do really good work, and not just for research purposes, but for your patients. And this is who all of us, this is the whole point of what we do. For the patients. Well done to you. I've got to say, take my hat off to you.
Thank you.
You've done well, son. Keep going. You do awesome stuff, really. It's brilliant work.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, something I'm passionate about, and I learn a lot from. I'm not a very original person. I just take a look at what's been already done, and I try to put it together and take the best bits of everybody else's good work and put it together. And I learn a lot from other practitioners, and I learn a lot from my clients. The amount of teaching that I've had from them has been immense. I have significant gratitude towards them and other practitioners.
Well, we have our gratitude to you, and we are certainly learning from your investigation. So thank you so much for joining us on FX Medicine today.
Thank you for having me.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. The Mind International Forum will be held in Sydney on the 23rd and 24th of March 2019. To find out more and to register for this premier event, please go to forum.mind.org.